live again with another episode of I Build at 4 a.m. This time we have as a guest Eric from Base, DevRel Lead from Base. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Hey, Joe. Great to be here. Doing well.
That's awesome, man. So let's talk a little bit about your experience as developer advocate in developer relations as a whole, and talk a little bit about rollups, value over infra, and everything that we can deep dive in here in a quick session, just to be able to pick your brain a little bit. I wanted to start asking you about what's the real role of rollups right now, right? It feels like rollups moved a little bit from a big headline that existed back then to being the backbone of the infrastructure on the whole Ethereum ecosystem. How do you feel about it?
I agree. And I think that transition is one that we would hope to see. You don't want the technical infrastructure of an industry to be the main headline. It makes sense. For a long time in our industry, we were very much so in the infrastructure building phase of our whole industry, and it was very necessary. We had issues with throughput, scaling that had been known basically since the inception of the industry, and we were working on resolving that. And it's still something that we're working on as an ecosystem, but now we're in a place where we're seeing high throughput rollups, Ethereum ecosystem scaling rapidly. And while the engineers and the protocol engineers continue to iterate and work on how to make rollups as secure and fast as possible, it should become less and less of that main headline, especially for folks who aren't in our industry and aren't necessarily looking to learn about the latest in rollups. And I think if we get to a point where people are learning about rollups because they're interested in it, that's great, but they don't need to know about the underlying piping if they're just a builder.
Do you think we will reach that spot where Web2 reached at some point where people don't know what a protocol is or what they are even using behind the screens?
I suspect we'll see some variation of that. I think an easier comparison than the internet might be like credit cards. So when I go and swipe my credit card, when I grab it out of my wallet or use Apple Pay, I'm not super familiar. Like, is this a MasterCard? Is this a Visa card? I'm not totally sure. But every once in a while, I do have to know because a processor might only take one of those two payment networks, which is actually a bug, not a feature, right? And ideally, we get to a point with interoperability where nobody even needs to know that. So I think that consumers will probably get to a point where they don't need to know necessarily which rollup they're interacting with. But it is always a core piece of the infrastructure. And of course, the engineers and developers who are creating their applications very much so will know which rollup or ideally rollups with interoperability that they're able to interact with from their application.
There's a huge value around that, and also account abstraction, right? Just besides the way that the rollups interrupt with each other, there's like a second layer on top of that, which might already help the user. I think Base has some good work around that too, correct?
Definitely. Yeah, so I would say that account abstraction is, and kind of what we're doing with accounts is the next layer of the internet. And our on-chain accounts kind of ideally will become what I like to call account layer of the internet. Because we finally reached a point where if you look at the iteration of wallets, like the initial innovation of wallets, which was really powerful, is that it's an account that you own. Never before had that been possible. An account that you own, you bring your account to the app and not the other way around. But as we know in the industry, this caused all sorts of pain points with connecting wallets, user experience, security. We all know it. And account abstraction has gotten to us to a point where now that experience of managing your account, it feels very similar to interacting with a Web2 style of account, whether it might be, Gmail, OTP, or a passkey, which I still think is the best. And as a result of that, the beauty of it is now the way that I authenticate into the front end of my application can be the same as the way that I authenticate into the chain side of my application. And I think some people, when that clicks, it's really significant. It used to be that when I was authenticating into an on-chain app, I had to do it twice. I had to do it once for the front end, using probably JWT or Google Auth, something like that, and then using my wallet basically to bring my on-chain account into the application. Now with account abstraction, that's all one experience. You use your Face ID with your passkey, you're into the app holistically. And now, of course, like you mentioned, Base, we've been doing a ton of work with Smart Wallet and building in the open with some open standards and EIPs around interoperability, even in the account layer, right? So we work a lot on interoperability on the chain layer with the OP team, but also the account layer, it's just as important. And improving user experience through things like spend permissions and sub accounts, creating these accounts that are a little bit easier to manage, have more context of all the apps that you interact with, is the next step that we're taking with Smart Wallet at Base.
This is awesome. We can clearly see some nice level of tooling in action there. I would like to, there's always this discussion that I have with people on regards of what sorts of problems should be solved by the app developers themselves and the problems that should be solved by the protocol designers themselves, right? I think there's a very big distinction there, but often protocol designers end up leaving those issues for the app developers, and app developers pick protocols that already solve the problems for them, but not one protocol solves all the problems for that. What kinds of issues that you see that have this dilemma going on right now?
Yeah, this is, I think, in the Ethereum ecosystem, scaling and like throughput is a big one, right? Like getting faster transaction speeds that have confirmation protection is a big one. And as chains are getting faster and faster across, but you have, like Base, we're working on getting flash blocks out into production. It's currently on Sepolia testnet where you have 200 millisecond block times. But then, of course, you have other, rollups like Mega ETH that their core value prop is the speed of their transaction throughput. Speed is something that clearly exists at the protocol engineer level. Like as a app developer, there's nothing I can go in and do other than centralize my app to get around that. But I do believe that this is a challenging problem because as a app developer, you have to deal with the constraints of the protocols available to you, even if it is at the end of the day a responsibility of the protocol team to solve those problems. And there's a little bit of that kind of tug back and forth where protocol teams, they know these things are value adds that if they accomplish that, they'll win more app developers. And app developers are also the ones that are giving them the feedback about what's really important and what's not really important. And so when you have a brand new cutting edge industry like ours, you get this constant back and forth of both sides of the industry are finding kind of PMF at the same time. And it just depends where you are in the value chain that determines, is that conversation two-sided? Are you trying to work with a protocol to help them sort through what's most important to you while also talking to your end users and figuring out what's most important to them? That's a challenge that app builders face, is that they need to be looking in both directions. Whereas on the protocol side, they have their own equation internally and externally, but it's slightly different. And so that is a paradigm that, while in an ideal world, the protocols would be able to handle it. And the rule being, if two different app builders need to build the same thing, then it probably shouldn't be on the app builders to build it. Yeah. It should be on either the protocol stack or kind of the middleware stack. But that's kind of where we exist today as an industry.
How does this feedback loop happen for Base, for example?
Sure. Well, we're constantly working with builders, right? So specifically DevRel, one of the key things that we do is working with builders to collect feedback and bring that internally to our product engineering and design teams, and doing that as quickly as possible to get all those insights. Sohi is out there in the wild working with mini app developers, testing their apps with them to see what's working, what's not working, finding the feedback. And then every single week, that's influencing product direction internally. And whether you're an app builder, a protocol builder, a team like Base that's doing protocol, but also dev tooling, all those things, it's always PMF. PMF, right? Test that, get the feedback loop as quickly as possible. And everybody has their own version of what PMF looks like what is your product, what is your market, and how you fit. But that's how we do it. And of course, also, all of our engineers and product teams, they're working with builders as well and collecting those insights. We have an incredible user research team that's out there in the wild every day, getting these insights as well, and making sure that we iterate quickly and ship quickly to get those out into the market. And as you know, João, and as a lot of listeners might know, but just to reiterate, to drive the point home, is you got to ship it to get that feedback. And ship it to people who don't care about you. Don't ask your friends, don't ask your family, right? Because they'll be too nice. Ship it to people who don't care, don't give you that raw, honest feedback.
There is always a long discussion, right, about shipping the perfect solution so you get a good first impression, and then shipping fast so you can have feedback, so you can iterate and improve and really improve on it, right? What's the first impressions like for people who are using Base? How does onboarding happen? So since it must be seamless for both devs and for users as well. So what are the techniques? What are the practices that you put there?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just quickly address that first point about balancing going to market too early with an unpolished product versus waiting and coming with something more polished. This is not a universal rule, but I would say generally you should be shipping without any of the nice to have features and just the core value prop that you're testing. And there's different levels of what that core value prop is. Obviously, if you're a financial application, part of your core value prop is security, and you need to make sure your product is secure. But if you don't have those types of security questions at mind, you could be doing something that's a lot faster to test that value prop. One story I love is Zappos, right? Zappos, they started selling shoes without owning the shoes, so they didn't have to manage a warehouse. And then they would just backfill the orders once they came in. And so I would say focus on the core value prop and ship it, and don't worry too much about the polish, because if you have identified something that the market truly needs, they'll be willing to get around the rough edges of it. Think about ChatGPT when it first came out 2.5 years ago now. There were outages, the interface wasn't good, it was hard to find the previous conversations, but as users, we were willing to fight around that because the core value prop was incredible. So that's what I would say to that. In regards to Base, I would say, so there's of course the Base developer that is onboarded to build with us, and then there's the user of those applications. And so I can kind of go through that flow, because for me, user onboarding is the developers and getting developers onboarded. And our experience, it looks very different. And this is something that in the on-chain space, you can't apply a universal approach to builders, because you have all the different personas, from super large institutions like Shopify to college students to 0 to 1 founders. And so it's all about identifying kind of what is their core need, right? Are they looking to be in kind of more in the on-chain space where they brand themselves that way? Are they just looking for better payment rails? And depending on what those things are, then you can take them through the value that Base or the on-chain ecosystem can provide to their application, and why it will make them more successful as a founder. And that's really a key point, is trying to not talk about a lot of the ethos-driven reasons that I joined the space, which is hard, because it's what makes me passionate about the space is the decentralization and financial inclusion and all of those great things that our space is enabling. But for a lot of builders, I'm looking for better payment rails that don't have as large of fees. And you're focusing on that value prop in order to get them excited about what is possible with Base. As far as users go, it's our job to get the developers to build apps with great onboarding experiences. Of course, the industry has talked about account abstraction being that unlock for a long time, and here we are. And I would say that we're still working on convincing builders to actually integrate these things. And it would be great to see builders really adopting this new tech, because the experience is way better. And then there's just a host of key problems. And I would even say, so we provide on-chain kit as just an easy library of TypeScript and React components and utilities. And sometimes I'll just walk devs through those docs, because each of those components was built to solve one of the core problems that faces builders in creating a good UX than an on-chain app. And so it's like there's an on-ramp component for a reason, because if you're unfamiliar with this space, you might not be aware of it, but it's really hard to on-ramp, right? So you have an on-ramp component, you have swap components that you can drop in, and these types of things that get them familiar with the pain points that, frankly, I think used to exist and have solutions now. But even for some of our developers, we have a little bit of, amnesia is the wrong word, but where we're stuck a little bit in the past and not realizing that like that problem that used to exist a year and a half ago, it's been solved. So like if you're getting stopped by something because you think it's a problem that exists, I'd encourage you to actually go look again and see, does this really exist anymore? And then that gives you the better user onboarding experience.
There's this huge barrier that is making people move off their set ways, right? So if someone is very used to, I don't know, the Web 2 applications, they will have a hard time moving on to Web 3 sometimes. But the same is true for people who are already building for Web 3. They are so used at using that specific wallet, using that specific way of interacting with applications, that when they find something that's minimally different, they already think the market will not accept it. But sometimes it's just a change of perspective. And it's really hard for people to get this understanding that, as you mentioned, the solution is already there and you can just use it, right?
Right. That's a great point. We have a little bit of a challenge as an industry where we have one foot in two different boats, right? It's, as a product designer, you have to look at your target market and recognize that the initial group that will most likely adopt it, because they're early adopters in the industry, are using old paradigms, and they're using EOA wallets that don't have smart smart contract functionality via 7702 yet, or something like that, and are used to these old design patterns, even if some of them are actually kind of anti-patterns. And then the entire off-chain world, which we want these new patterns for, and supporting both of them at the same time makes the experience worse for the new crew, but not supporting the existing crew can hurt kind of your initial audience for adoption. And what I would say is, I think 7702, the ability to provide those existing like browser wallets, whether it be MetaMask or Phantom, with the functionality provided by Account-abstraction, is a great unlock to get us one step closer to getting them a little bit more similar. I don't envision a period where in the near term where you're not going to see the list of 50 different wallets that you can connect. And that's kind of like part of the interoperability of the space. But we do want to make sure that no matter what wallet you do connect, your experience can be the same. And it can be as good as what is possible to build net new today with the infrastructure that has been provided with Account-abstraction.
Yeah, sure. That makes total and complete sense. You mentioned sometimes you walk with devs through the documentation. And I think you have a new documentation, right? How that's going? There's a new phase, a new release right there?
Yeah. We just last week released our new and improved doc site, which we're excited about. And I can actually pull that up quickly just to show it off. And I can show you then kind of which part of the documentation I'm talking about when I walk folks through. So let me pull this up really quickly. So here you can see our new docs. There's a lot of great features in it. There's an overall look and feel improvement. But one of the parts that we're most excited about is kind of some of the AI enablement, where you can easily copy pages, chat about the page in ChatGPT or Claude. And then the whole site is now, there's an AI assistant that's been trained on all of the docs. So you can just come straight to our docs if you have questions, what you want to build, how you want to build it. You're looking for a specific product, or you have specific questions about a product, you can come in and ask questions to the assistant. And all of our search is also AI enabled. So we're really excited about that. As far as like actually walking devs through, what I was mentioning is on ChainKit, and we have all of these different components that solve those core pain points, right? So, the buy component, which makes it super easy to buy something from your e-commerce store with crypto. Earn, which provides drop-in liquidity, yield opportunities that you can embed directly in your app if that makes sense for your app. Funding, which is another form of on-ramping with different components there, identity components, token transactions, wallet connections with a bunch of different styles. So usually this is what I would walk somebody through if they're net new and say, you should ask yourself for each of these components, is there a reason to use it? Is there a reason not to use it? And have a good answer to that. And I would honestly even say that for all of our different products, right? Like Smart Wallet, if you're not using Smart Wallet, that should be a very intentional product decision because, again, these tools have all been built by the Base team who has seen all the different pain points that builders run into. And these are what we've identified as key unlocks to get there. And so just by like going through and seeing these dev tools, you can quickly identify how to build and avoid some of those potholes that you might otherwise step right into.
I think there's huge value on what you said right there, that these tools were built by the core team because they found the value of it. We have an initiative here in Cartesi, which is the Experiment Week, that oftentimes we like put pens down and we build ourselves using the tech, kind of making a mini hackathon. Do you have any initiatives like that? Do you support developers on your own protocol developers on better understanding the tech itself that they're promoting or they're bringing to people?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you ask because we're in the middle of that this week. So right now is our hack week. Everybody's kind of, like you said, pens down as far as work towards our key objectives and a time to go out and solve those problems that, you know, have not had a chance to be solved and could make a real dent. And so we definitely understand the value in that and making sure that there's space to innovate internally based off of what we see and you know, the day-to-day conversations. You know, even I have like a list of reminders of all the different things that I think could you know, help builders. And so this is a fun week to share those with the team and see what everybody builds. And we'll see on Friday what the team comes up with when everybody presents.
This is awesome. Do the results go public for us to be able to see what's coming?
You know, I don't know that they do, given that a lot of it is just like a hack, and sometimes it's just sometimes it turns into a little bit more of a moment that might become a product of ours, which has happened in the past. But this week it'll all just be internal. But I'm sure that it'll surface eventually. And there's also a lot going on right now in the Base world and announcements coming. So we'll make sure that we leave space for those to have their time in the light.
This is awesome. But leaving the protocol developers in peace a little bit and dipping into general Base builders, right? What are the most creative ideas that you see coming from the Base ecosystem?
Man, it's hard to narrow down. I think highlighting a couple areas of focus. So I think that right now, mini apps, they're having a huge moment, and I think it's warranted. So for those who don't know, mini apps, I'm specifically referencing the ones that are built on the Farcaster decentralized social graph. And they're incredibly powerful because they give your app immediate distribution directly within the feed. We've seen some amazing apps come out. One that we're excited about that came out of Base Batches, which was a global build-a-thon and accelerator program, was Noise, which is a mini app that allows you to monetize different social interactions on Farcaster. So anytime now that I go like somebody's post, I'm making a microtransaction to that person. I think I'm paying like a penny or a percentage of a penny. And they're innovating in a really interesting space around how social builds parallel monetary incentives around the existing attention market incentives that already exist and we're all familiar with in social, trying to, you know, build an audience and reply guy your way to fame, so to speak. So I think that anybody who has an app that is consumer focused in any way should consider enabling it as a mini app. And I say it that way because a mini app is just a web application that has the specific SDK wrapped around it that enables it to display basically in a mobile format within the Farcaster clients, including the new Coinbase wallet. and you get way more distribution. We've seen some really cool instances where somebody hacks together a project, and then the very next day they've already had thousands of people using their application. There's no app store approvals. There's no pain going that you launch it, it's out. If you already have an existing app, you can get all this new distribution. And there's really cool things where you can create notifications within the client so that I get notifications about my different apps all within. I use Coinbase Wallet as my Farcaster client, and that way it's like one central repo on each of notifications, and each day I can see, oh, I want to go to this app, that app. And so that's something I would definitely recommend that people go check it out, innovate. And alongside with that is basically this whole creator monetization space, which I think is really innovative. If you want to be on the cutting edge of like where the industry is going with net new experiences, I would say getting into like creator monetization, what's happening with like tools like Zora, Clanker, Flaunch, with kind of this tokenized everything movement. And there's a lot of different opinions on that, but I think no matter what your opinion is on some of that, it's like, this is clearly where we're innovating and leveraging tokens, which is like a primitive of our industry that is incredibly, incredibly powerful, and finding different ways to use that to create major unlocks.
I love that you mentioned creator economy, because we have a solution that actually runs on Base. It's called Rives, which is this virtual console that is fully based on that. So people can actually create their own cartridges and sell them, and it works really well. It's an amazing solution. I highly suggest anyone to test it, and I find it really cool, because you can use all that convenience, and then on top of it, then you just put an extra execution layer. It's really awesome. What about specific trends? Those things that generate so much hype on Twitter, on-chain social. Well, you just mentioned, but like AI and crypto and game mechanics and things that generate all that quick noise that we see every now and then in the industry.
Yeah, well, I think that stablecoins are certainly having a moment. This is something that nobody in our industry is surprised by, but it is finally here. And I think that infrastructure doesn't exist yet. And it isn't as necessarily like flashy and innovative as some of the creator stuff, but giving utility to stablecoins by creating applications that make it easy for people to leverage stablecoins, manage their finances, whether it be a business or a corporation or an individual, those are in a place now where those value props can really finally take off, because there's a lot of different global stable coins that are now in the Ethereum ecosystem that are on Base. It's not just USDC, right? I think there's now almost 20 different international stable coins that are on Base. There's a ton of amazing things that you can do, whether it's focusing on local off-ramping as point of sale payment solutions, or I saw a really cool app that was like teaching family planning to kids by giving them a smart account that's like has permissions and is controlled, but allows them to interact with real financial applications on chain using stablecoins. And so I think that's a really cool moment that's happening, and the total addressable market of that is everybody. So that's a really great space to be in. And then of course you mentioned agents, and that's a movement that is also like innovating, and you're kind of combining two cutting edge industries at the same time. So there's it's definitely a space for the brave who are ready to face the Wild West and get their hands dirty and really create something cool. I think what we're seeing come out of that space is super interesting. It's challenging always to like create new primitives. And so you see somebody create something new, and then a lot of people kind of come in and do something similar, whether it be, the Twitter bots, or, creating tokens via posts, whether it be tweets or casts, which is really cool and exciting, but definitely looking to see that space take the next step. The Coinbase developer platform released X402, which is super exciting. It's a way to pay for API access via an existing HTTP code, so that you can just pay with crypto directly instead of, obviously your agent doesn't have a credit card and can't sign in to Stripe. But if it had an X402 endpoint, it could pay for access to those endpoints. in crypto. And obviously, it's a no-brainer that the entire agent economy will use digital assets because they operate in an entirely digital sphere. So tons of opportunity there. And yeah, if you're in that space, I would say it's definitely this. You have to be intentional about how you manage where your unique value is, because you're competing a little bit on two sides. You have the existing large AI infrastructure providers who you have to be just cautious of them coming in and co-opting whatever it is that you've built, as well as, the entire crypto industry is innovating at a really rapid pace. So to stay on top of both of those takes a very high motor team, but if you're able to do it, the opportunity there is massive.
Yeah, I think anytime you're dealing with two fronts in anything, in any aspect of life, you have a much harder time than when you're dealing with just one, right? Even being a protocol designer, for example, you're dealing with the devs that you have to convince to create in your platform, and then the users that you have to onboard, because it gets easier for them to find other applications in your platform once they are in already. But there is this one thing that I wanted to pick your brain about, which is, what are the things that you think are success signals for the developers on not only the basic ecosystem, on Web3 as a whole, right? What is it that clicks, that makes you think, I made it, it works, it's awesome?
It's a challenging space to exactly identify that. I would say the leading indicators to whatever that metric is being very clear on what your value add is. And if that value add includes any technology focused words, then you need to rewrite it, right? So that's a key insight for me. If I'm talking to a team and they can explain their value prop without mentioning AI, without mentioning blockchain or tokens, right? Like if you can speak to what my burning need is, and my burning need isn't that something has been built with AI, right? It's what the AI can do for me. Same thing with the on-chain space. And so being very, very intentional about that, and then having a very clear feedback pipeline, like you and I were talking about earlier, is shipping that to market quickly and being able to pivot, be flexible, and hear that feedback and focus on just that unique value proposition. That's an amazing leading indicator to success, because oftentimes you go to market, you're wrong. You're wrong. That's the reality of being a founder or a builder in the space. But the beauty of shipping quickly is that you learn what was wrong, and then you improve it, you fix it, and then that's how you get there. Like YouTube was a dating site, right? Like, and here we are. So the best apps ever built were wrong when they first went to market. So shipping to market and getting that feedback quickly is another great leading indicator. The last thing I'd say is, go ahead.
Make the mistakes fast as you can.
Fail quickly, yeah, and try to only fail once within each failure pattern. And if you're reaching a point where you could go to somebody who's off-chain and has very little know-how about our space, and you can explain what it is that your app does, and they can get excited about it and onboard to that experience within 60 seconds, that's a really, really good sign, right? Because you're able to activate them, and it's all about shortening the time to value, right? And like fulfilling the promise that you've sold. So if you get people excited about the promise, that's a great step one. But then you need to fulfill that promise as quickly as possible, where they don't say, that it's a cool idea, it's a cool promise, but this is too much work. And so getting there quickly and fulfilling that value, that's, yeah.
We reached that point in Web2 where researchers started to show that if someone had to wait 3 seconds for a page to load, it was already too much, and they would abandon it. Like half of the users would abandon it, and then it seems like we're having to just to think of the sheer size of the barrier that is to onboard someone to use Web3. It feels like we really need a very good speech. We really need a very good reason for people to want to overcome the barrier, right?
Yes, yeah, you have to, right? Like nobody's gonna do it just because they're curious. They'll download it for a little while, they'll try a free trial, and then they'll leave once the curiosity is gone. You have to really address that value. But what I would say is we are in a place now where indisputably apps that are built on chain and have access to the functionality that being on chain provides are way better than those that are off chain, right? We've seen a couple flashes in the pan of this with things like Polymarket that hit mainstream news, and it's about identifying the new paradigms that exist in the value add of being on chain and bringing that to the users in a way that's clear and exciting. And a lot of it is, I think, with consumer experiences, some form of like monetization or tokenization. And that's like not to say, meme coins or anything like that, which meme coins are great. I think they have a really important spot in our ecosystem. I think that what is defined as a meme coin is evolving, but it's kind of the job to say on-chain, just being on-chain is not going to sell it. You have to be able to speak to, there's this thing that on-chain allows my app to do that an off-chain app can't do, and that's why we're going to win.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Strongly agree on that. And before we finish and before we wrap up the episode, I would like to propose to you a rapid fire section where I shot some questions at you, and you can't barely think of any answers. Just give me like one word, one sentence answers at most, right? Okay, let's try it. So what's the most underrated protocol right now?
Hypersub, on-chain subscriptions.
All right. One thing you wish every new Web3 dev understood on day one?
That on-chain is not your value prop.
What's a buzzword in Web3 you'd love to retire?
Web3.
What's one thing Base does better than people realize?
Scaling, I would say the team's capacity. I think oftentimes people think that because we're incubated by Coinbase, we have this massive unlimited amount of resources. And the way the team operates is incredibly efficient. And I think that is probably underrated.
This is awesome. This is awesome. What's the biggest misconception about rollups today?
Probably that their amount of influence that they have on token price. I think that's way overemphasized.
Yeah, I agree. Now, one UX fix you think will unlock the next wave of users?
Oh boy, this is a tough one for one sentence.
You can go long for this one. This is the last one, so you can go long.
Yeah, the point I want to say, which probably needs some description, is the user experience of illustrating the value prop. I think that like in our space, sometimes we get a little bit too caught up with the user experience is the blocker. It was, but now it's not, right? The solutions are there. You can have super snappy onboarding experiences. The user experience unlock is focusing on unique value, right? And there's not one unlock that'll bring everybody in, because nobody's going to come in unless there is that unique value, right? And so just because you now have account abstraction and it's easier to onboard, people are only going to onboard if there's a good reason to onboard. So your user experience must have a center of gravity that is a unique value that does not exist anywhere else. And that's what will bring the users.
This is awesome. That's amazing. And that was our rapid fire. And I think that wraps up also all the questions I had for you today. If there's any other topic that you want to talk about or any message that you want to send out.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, João. This has been great. Really, really appreciate the conversation and excited to see what everybody builds. Please reach out to myself or anybody on the DevRel team at Base. We're here to support you. And João, I look forward to chatting with you more, and hopefully I get to see you at CC next week.
Yeah, me too, man. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for your availability. And this was iBuilder 4 AM. Keep building and pioneering the world of Web3. Bye-bye.